I've kind of learned that, sorry, Nick, but I've given you the nickname Talking Stick Nick.
Yeah, you asked Nick one question.
And then he just goes.
I knew he was going to do that the first time. I was like, how was your guys' deer season? What was the highlight of your season? Well, Nick, you go first. Like,
all of it.
About the entire And I just kind of sat there and was like, yeah, man, I haven't heard this story 18,000 times.
You were there.
I was there.
You lived it. Rolling?
You are good.
All right. Before we start this episode out, I have an announcement to make, and this is specifically for one person, my brother. As you can see in probably the top left corner of your guys' screen is that there is a new addition to our Field to Food podcast wall.
That is the second whitest head here.
Kyle, I have your deer head. Come pick it up. You owe me $100. I have told you a couple of times through text messages and phone calls, so I'm telling you on the podcast, you owe me $100. Here it is.
Calling them out.
Whoever said that.
So I'm getting you on Instagram now, okay? Come get it. All right, so turkey, spring stuff. All right, so I'm just going to start with the weekends, or I guess the past week of scouting that I've had, building up from a couple of things that I learned from turkey over the past couple of years, and after what we've talked about so far on the podcast with the mushroom hunting, taking some of the stuff that you were saying, and we had a very good week mushroom hunting. So I'll start with that. So you mentioned in what's going to be probably the episode after this, you guys were finding mushrooms kind of on the top part of ridges.
Yep.
So we were working our way up some hills in southern Ohio, and it makes a lot of sense that the more sunlight's getting to the top of the ridge versus the bottom, plus the thermals dropping down in the evenings, cooling the ground down. So what we would do is when we would find even just a small mushroom, one that's not even worth picking, we would locate it and then take a plane like across the terrain line, same elevation, and then walk across it. And we were actually finding a couple more smaller mushrooms that way. And we weren't picking the small ones, obviously, but we were also down there on a permission property. And the guys that own it are going down this weekend for a turkey opener. And I'm like, well, they're coming down. They're going to have a lot of fun as a couple. So why don't we leave these mushrooms for them, and we'll just take some of the big ones. So we probably found 30 or 40. We took 7. But we also had a burn there back in the beginning of March, so that played a lot into it, and some of the discoloration that we haven't seen before. So I actually want to get your answers on a couple questions that I have, and I'll toss this up on the screen for you guys during the actual episode, so you're not looking at us looking at our phones. So this is what I believe to be a blonde, but it looks very orange.
Mm-hmm. So there's blondes, yellows, grays, blacks, half breeds.
Okay.
Or half freeze.
Okay. So
when you get into like yellows, the yellows are like when you see like these guys come out with like morels like this big.
Yeah.
Those are yellows.
Okay. So is this a specific color to a specific morel then?
So usually, like, you can actually find yellows like that.
Okay.
And when they start getting that orangish tint, they're just a little older.
Oh, okay. So that had nothing to do with the ash on the ground from the burn. That was just the mushroom itself, because it was like a lot denser and firmer than
so
other
when they
mushrooms
start
that we
to
had
dry
picked.
out, they'll kind of turn that way. So like, if you pick that one, good, because if you would have came back a couple days later, that would be dead and rotted.
All right, so that's what we did. We picked the ones that were bigger and firmer, but the ones that were small, we left for the property owner. He's going down with his girlfriend on, I think, Saturday. So we took what we learned from that property, went a county north yesterday, and we did, actually, no, it was this morning. We did a whole bunch of mushroom hunting this morning. Went to the top of a ridge on the north side, and we were finding those half breeds. Mm-hmm. And those are the ones that are mostly stem and just pretty much like a half thumb on top, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So we found a couple of those, and I think I sent that to the group chat last week, and you guys were all calling them dog peckers, right?
Yeah, dog peckers. So like they're still good to like eat, and they're still good to pick, but the flavorful part of the mushroom is like the meaty portion, like the actual head of it.
Yeah.
So like the stalk really doesn't do much for you, because especially for like the way my dad does it, is we find so many at a time. He actually oh, what's it called? He puts them in a dehydrator.
Okay.
So they get real small.
Yeah.
So like, you'll have a mushroom that's like this big. And then when you put it in the dehydrator, it's
You lose all
that
moisture.
big. And then basically the stock is gone.
Okay.
There's nothing there for you. So like the half freeze, like when we find them, like we'll pick them, if it's later in the season. But I mean, there's really not much there because we basically just lob the head off.
Okay.
Because there's not much to them.
So that's one of the questions that I had for you is that all the mushrooms that we picked, we did find a couple of grays.
In my opinion, when it comes to like flavor, grays and blacks are the best.
Okay.
They taste the best when you cook them on a skillet with butter.
So we have a container. It's like 4x4x4, and I showed Kyle earlier. It's pretty much packed to the full of morels, but a lot of them are stems. Mm-hmm. We're gonna probably dehydrate the whole thing. So, is there any recommendations that you have for that?
So as far as like the dehydrating, like my dad would always kind of like bring it back to life with some sort of like a stock or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I personally, I don't really do that. I just eat them when I get them.
Okay.
And, like I just cook them in a skillet because like he tries different ways to like cook them and everything. And he's back when I didn't care about it, he always tried to get me to try them. And I'm like, it didn't really do anything for me, especially like when you rehydrate them, like they're not bad, but the flavor's different.
Okay.
It's kind of like when we had that discussion when we were talking about like the inner tenderloins on a deer. And you were like, if I shoot a deer, I'm having tenderloins that night because like I don't like to freeze them because they taste different. That's how I feel about morels.
Okay.
Like I get them and like I eat them, and if I'm not going to eat them right away, I'll give them to like friends and family,
All right.
so they can eat them. I don't personally like the whole dehydrated portion of it. It's not that you can't eat them. It's not that they're not good. It's just they're better. Like if you eat them quickly.
So we have the morels in the container, washed and dried in the fridge. How many days do we have to get after them before they start getting weird on us?
I'd probably say a few days.
Like 2-3 days?
Yeah, unless if you're gonna try to keep them for the long game, then dehydrate them.
Okay.
Because if not, then yeah, they're gonna start going bad.
So that was my thought. I was like, well, this is a good bunch that if we ate in one sitting, that's probably going to be a lot. Unless we made a really big meal and just planned for leftovers. And then I was like, or we could dehydrate these and then bring them back to life later down the road. With it being this early into season, my thought was, well, we can probably save these and then get some of the grays and the blacks coming later because they were the blondes or orange, and then we had a couple of those half breeds in there and just a few grays. And I was like, this is a good batch, but I think we're going to get better over the next couple of weeks. So that was the plan, but now after talking to you and getting some of those answers to those questions, I might just wind up saying, hey, we're going to eat these now.
Mm-hmm. So, like, yellows are like, they're super fun to find because I remember my dad took me to this one spot with one of his buddies and we were looking around and like, we didn't find anything at all. And then finally there was like this section of woods that I went to, which was surprising to me because usually like you don't find, most people think like, oh, mushrooms, they grow in like nasty places like swamps and all that stuff. I'm like, no, morels don't usually grow in like swampy areas. So there was this one section of the woods that was kind of had a bunch of down trees and it was kind of swampy-ish. And my dad was like, oh, we're not going to go over there.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm gonna go check it out. Because like I'd never been to this property before. And I was like, I'm just gonna go. So I went over there and I could see these yellows from like 30 yards away. That's how big they were. They were like softball size yellows.
That's a good mushroom.
And I'm like, I couldn't believe it because I'd never seen them before. And I'm like, snip, snip. And then like we always have these, we always go out with like these netting bags.
Mm-hmm.
They're almost like, think of it like a laundry bag,
Yep.
but just smaller.
Which is what we do too, because I always heard that you're supposed to let the spores fall out.
Yep, it helps plant the spores for the next season. But I filled mine.
Did you?
And then I told my dad, I'm like, hey, give me your bag. And then I filled his bag. And then his buddy didn't find it. I'm like, hey, give me your bag.
Yeah.
I was filling it with all these yellows, which, mind you, like I had 3 bags full, but I mean, I probably had like 40 yellows. These things were overflowing. And I remember like when we ate them, like it just, like they were good, but like the flavor wasn't as
A little lackluster.
Yeah, it wasn't as like, pronounced as, you know, like a gray or like a black. So like I remember the first time I ever had a black, I never really saw them because like they're harder to find. In my honest opinion, like I have found,
I'll believe it.
out of
They're darker.
well, not even the fact that they're harder to find. It's like you just don't, they just don't grow
Just not
as much.
just not as prevalent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like they're harder to find. Like things have to be like perfect. And I remember the first time like I found it with my dad, and like he made a big deal out of it. He's like, "Kid, you know what this is?" And I'm like, "No." And he's like, this is a black. Like this spot's amazing."
Yeah.
Like it's so hard to find these. And I remember when we went home, we cooked them up, and the flavor was just better in my opinion. It was just
bold.
better.
Yeah. So we had, I think, 6 or 7, half dozen or so out of that one property, and then the one that we went to this morning. This was really impromptu. I woke up at 4, which I normally do, but when we were out in the woods yesterday, Casey was enjoying a couple of what do we call them? Mountain Dews. I wasn't. I like being out in the woods, just plain and simple. Because
Dewless.
Yeah, because that's my happy spot. Like there's nothing else I need. I'm good. But she was walking around, and so we were planning on sleeping in this morning because she did have a couple of beverages.
Sugar.
A lot of sugar.
And green onions.
But I woke up at 4 and I was kind of pacing around the house. I was getting some stuff ready for turkey opener, and I was like, what are the odds that I can get her up and then we can go do some more mushroom hunting this morning? And I kind of like I walked back into the bedroom and I gave her a nudge, and she was like up, and I was like, all right, I got coffee on. Let's go look for mushrooms. So we went down there, and to our surprise, that's where we were finding the grays. But we were only finding all the mushrooms yesterday and today on south-facing slopes on that 2/3 up plane of ridge, and we were only finding them on benches. We weren't finding anything on the slope itself. If there was a bench, there's a good chance that we were going to find mushrooms. And I don't know why it was working out that way. If it's a collection of moisture, if it's getting a little bit more sunlight on that bench itself, I'm not sure. I don't know if you have any insight in it.
Now, when you say a bench, you're talking like when the hill comes down,
Flattens out.
Down, flattens out, and then back down. Yeah.
To be completely honest, when you're talking about like properties that are really hilly, most of the places other than that new spot that I just told you about that we found by my house, I haven't been to many properties that have hills. I've only gone to maybe 2, and yeah, like they're like exactly what you're saying. Like once you get to that little flat, it's just kind of like there's like a cluster. Like they're not everywhere. They're kind of clustered. That's why I said in the one episode, like when you see one, like I freeze.
Yeah.
Like I take note of it. Like I'll look at it. Like it's right there. And like I'm gonna get it, but like I start looking around because I want to make sure I'm not stepping on one. Because like I've unfortunately done that before.
Yep.
Being new to it.
That which you can feel your soul squish with the mushroom.
Yeah.
You're like, oh no.
Yeah. And it's just like I'm still gonna take it.
Let's wash you off a little bit better than the rest
those
of
are the
them.
ones we take home and we throw in the backyard and try to get them to come back. But yeah, the one property my dad took me to is one of his buddies, and yeah, that was one of the first properties I ever went to that had like hills and slopes and everything, and like yeah, it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
But I haven't gone to too many places that are hilly.
So I like it's I guess it's like an instinct thing. When you're out hunting or in this case looking for mushrooms or whatever, like when you find the spot that you're looking for or you see what you're looking for, like I think we all freeze. Like we all know not to move. So I started doing that a couple years ago. Mushroom hunting is like, all right, I see one. And then I would just exactly what you were saying. But I would point my finger at the one that I saw, and I would keep my hand there, and then I would start looking around. I'm like, okay, are there any more? Because when you find one, there's more. So I started doing that, and that was a big game changer for me for finding more mushrooms. And granted, I never have taken the time to be like, oh, I'm gonna go look for mushrooms, or I'm gonna go look for sheds. Now this was something found during mushroom hunting. But like it's one of those things. Like if you dedicate yourself a little bit of extra time, it's gonna happen. And it's tough with mushrooms because it is a timing thing.
Yep.
But so far, pre-turkey season with the scouting that we've done for turkey themselves, but actually saying like, hey, we're going out to listen for turkey, but we're going out to look for mushrooms. And that is 100% bred from this podcast, why we went out this past week looking for those things, because normally we're like, all right.